All right. Picking back up where we left off with Race Matters by Cornel West, demystifying the new black conservative. All right, we're at the bottom of page 52. The new black conservatives assume that without affirmative action programs, white Americans will make choices on merit rather than on race. Yet they have adduced no evidence for this. Most Americans realize that job hiring choices are made both on reasons of merit and on personal grounds. And it is this personal dimension that is often influenced by racist perceptions. Therefore, the pertinent debate regarding black hiring is never, quote, merit versus race, end quote, but whether hiring decisions will be based on merit, influenced by race bias against blacks, or on merit, influenced by race bias, but with special consideration for minorities and women as mandated by laws. In light of actual employment practices, the black conservative rhetoric about race-free hiring criteria, usually coupled with the call for dismantling affirmative action mechanisms, does no more than justify actual practices of racial discrimination. Black conservative claims about self-respect should not obscure this fact, nor should they be regarded as different from the normal self-doubts and insecurities of new arrivals in the American middle class. It is worth noting that most of the new black conservatives are first-generation middle-class persons who offer themselves as examples of how well the system works for those willing to sacrifice and work hard. Yet, in familiar American fashion, genuine white peer acceptance still preoccupies and often escapes them. In this regard, they are still affected by white racism. The eclipse of U.S. hegemony in the world is also an important factor for understanding black conservatives' views on foreign policy. Although most of the press attention they receive has to do with their provocative views on domestic issues, I would suggest that the widespread support black conservatives receive from conservatives in the Reagan and Bush administrations and Jewish neo-conservatives has much to do with their views on U.S. foreign policies. Though black conservatives rightly call attention to the butchery of bureaucratic elites in Africa who rule in the name of a variety of ideologies, they reserve most of their energies for supporting U.S. intervention in Central America and the U.S. substantive aid to Israel. Their relative silence regarding the U.S. policy of, quote, constructive engagement, end quote, with South Africa is also revealing. The black conservative stance is significant in light of the dramatic shift that has occurred in black America regarding America's role in the world. A consequence of the civil rights movement and the black power ideology of the 60s was a growing identification of black Americans with other oppressed peoples around the world. This has had less to do with the common skin color and more to do with shared social and political experience. Many blacks sympathize with Polish workers and Northern Irish Catholics, despite problematic Polish-black and Irish-black relations in places like Chicago and Boston. And more blacks are cognizant of how South Africa oppresses its native peoples, how Chile and South Korea repress their citizens, and how Israel mistreats the Palestinians. In fact, the radical consequences for domestic issues of this growing black international consciousness, usually dubbed anti-Americanism by the vulgar right, frightens the new black conservatives who find themselves viewed in many black communities as mere apologists for pernicious U.S. foreign policies. We can further understand the rise of the new black conservatives by highlighting the structural transformation of the U.S. economy. The contraction of the manufacturing sector and the expansion of the service sector of the labor market has narrowed job opportunities for semi-skilled and unskilled workers. Coupled with the decline of industrial jobs, which were a major source of black employment, is the most crucial transformation in the U.S. economy affecting black Americans in the past 4 decades. This is the mechanization of Southern agriculture. 40 years ago, 50% of all black teenagers had agricultural jobs, and more than 90% of those workers lived in the South. As these jobs disappeared, the black unemployment problem in urban centers mushroomed. The recent deindustrialization of northeastern and midwestern cities has exacerbated this problem. And with the added competition for jobs resulting from the entrance of new immigrants and white women into the labor market, semi-skilled and unskilled black workers have found it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to find employment. By 1980, 15% of all black men between the ages of 25 and 46 reported to the Census Bureau that they had earned nothing whatsoever the previous year. Often, the only option for young blacks is military enlistment. Indeed, the U.S. Army is nearly one-third black. The new black conservatives have rightly perceived that the black liberal leadership has not addressed these changes in the economy. Obviously, the idea that racial discrimination is the sole cause of the predicament of the black working poor and very poor is specious. And the idea that courts and government can significantly improve the plight of blacks by enforcing laws already on the books is even more spurious. White racism, though pernicious and potent, cannot fully explain the socio-economic position of the majority of black Americans. The crisis of black liberalism is the result of its failure to put forward a realistic response to the changes in the economy. The new black conservatives have highlighted this crisis by trying to discredit the black liberal leadership, arguing that the NAACP, the National Urban League, the Black Congressional Caucus, and most black elected officials are guided by outdated and ineffective viewpoints. The overriding aim of the new black conservatives is to undermine the position of black liberals and replace them with black Republicans, or even conservative black Democrats, who downplay governmental regulation and stress market mechanisms and success-oriented values in black communities. Yet the new black conservatives have been unable to convince black Americans that conservative ideology and policies of the Reagan and Bush administrations are morally acceptable and politically advantageous. The vast depoliticization and electoral disengagement of blacks suggests that they are indeed disenchanted with black liberals and distrustful of American political processes. And the downtrodden and degraded people with limited options may be ready to try any alternative. Nevertheless, black Americans have systematically rejected the arguments of the new black conservatives. This is not because blacks are duped by liberal black politicians, nor because blacks worship the Democratic Party. Rather, it is because most blacks conclude that white racial discrimination is not the sole cause of their plight. Rather, it is because most blacks conclude that white racial discrimination is not the sole cause of their plight, but it is certainly one cause. Thus, most black Americans view the new black conservative assault on the black liberal leadership as a step backward rather than forward. Black liberalism indeed is inadequate, but black conservatism is unacceptable. This negative reaction to black conservatives by most blacks partly explains the relative reluctance of some of the new black conservatives to engage in public debates in the black community and their contrasting eagerness to do so in the mass media, where a few go as far as to portray themselves as courageous and battle critics of a black liberal establishment, even while their salaries, honorariums, and travel expenses are paid by well-endowed conservative foundations and corporations. The new black conservatives have had their most The new black conservatives have had their most salutary effect on public discourse by highlighting the breakdown of the moral fabric in the country, and especially in black working poor and very poor communities. Black organizations like Reverend Jesse Jackson's Push have focused on this issue in the past, but the new black conservatives have been obsessed by it and thereby have given it national attention. Unfortunately, they view this urgent set of problems in primarily individualistic terms and fail to take seriously the historical background and social context of the current crisis. The black conservatives claim that the decline of values such as patience, deferred gratification, and self-reliance have resulted in the high crime rates, the increasing number of unwed mothers, and the relatively uncompetitive academic performances of black youth. And certainly, these sad realities must be candidly confronted. But nowhere in their writings do the new black conservatives examine the pervasiveness of sexual and military images used by the mass media and deployed by the advertising industry in order to entice and titillate consumers. Black conservatives thus overlook the degree to which market forces of advanced capitalist processes thrive on sexual and military images. Even a neoliberal like Daniel Bell, in stark contrast to black conservatives, highlights the larger social and cultural forces, for example, consumerism and hedonism, which undermine the Protestant ethic and its concomitant values. Yet Bell also tends to downplay the contribution of American capitalism to this process. Since the end of the post-war economic boom, certain strategies have been intensified to stimulate consumption, especially strategies aimed at American youth that project sexual activity as instant fulfillment and violence as the locus of machismo and identity. This market activity has contributed greatly to the disorientation and confusion of American youth, and those with less education and fewer opportunities bear the brunt of this cultural chaos. Ought we to be surprised that black youths isolated from the labor market, marginalized by decrepit urban schools, devalued by alienating ideals of Euro-American beauty, and targeted by an unprecedented drug invasion exhibit high rates of crime and teenage pregnancy? My aim is not to provide excuses for black behavior or to absolve blacks of personal responsibility. But when the new black conservatives accent black behavior and responsibility in such a way that the cultural realities of black people are ignored, they are playing a deceptive and dangerous intellectual game with the lives and fortunes of disadvantaged people. We indeed must criticize and condemn immoral acts of black people, but we must do so cognizant of the circumstances into which people are born and under which they live. By overlooking these circumstances, the new black conservatives fall into the trap of blaming black poor people for their predicament. It is imperative to steer a course between the Scylla of environmental determinism and the Charybdis of blaming the victim's perspective. The ideological blinders of the new black conservatives are clearly evident in their attempt to link the moral breakdown of poor black communities to the expansion of the welfare state. For instance, in Sowell's work, the preeminent structural element of political economic life relevant to the plight of black poor is the negative role of the state and the positive role of the market. A provocative and slightly unfair question to this descendant of slaves sold at the auction block is, can the market do any wrong? And then that brings us to I'm going to bring us to a stopping point there for us to reflect on some of the things that we just read in this chapter. I think the first thing that I want to harken back to is, one second. One of the things I want to harken back to is U.S. foreign policy. Now, anybody who's been following along with us, at the beginning of this book, one of the things that Cornel West pointed out in the pretext is the importance of, one of the things he pointed out in the third and final pretext, which was written in 2017. This whole book was put together released in 1993. But one of the things that he pointed out was the importance of intersectionality, the importance of solidarity with people struggling worldwide and with different issues that can be connected to the issues that we struggle with here in America. And he pointed out the struggle that Palestinians have in Israel in 2017. And we have seen that be something that manifested just as recently as earlier in 2021 with some of the struggles that were taking place in Palestine. Is for people who are not that informed about Palestine and Israel, I would encourage people to read the book Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. Within that book, they talk a lot about the similarities that exist in Palestine and in Israel with the apartheid that existed in South Africa and with the Jim Crow that existed in America in the 1960s. And so I think I just wanted to point out that even in 1993, this was, and it dates back much further than that, but even in 1993, this was an issue that was manifesting. And we have seen how a lot of black conservatives, even now to this day, do not see themselves as the Palestinians, do not connect the struggle that our black ancestors had with the struggle that Palestinians currently have, as opposed to some of the black liberal class or the black Democrats who do see, and you can be a conservative and still be a Democrat, but the black liberals who do connect themselves with that struggle that exists over in Palestine, and even people who are outside of just black liberals, black activists and black anarchists who connect themselves with that struggle that is going over there in Palestine. And so I think that that's another important talking point of why some of the conservative ideologies don't mesh or currently don't mesh with the black community or with the black masses. I think one of the other things, and that was sort of not a full completed thought how I wanted to, but one of the other things that I think is important to point out is deindustrialization that Cornel West is talking about. And so for people who understand or who know something about industrialization and deindustrialization, we're still in Rockford, is a city that heavily dealt with the negative impacts of deindustrialization and jobs moving from America to foreign countries where these corporations and these businesses can pay much less for the same type of work to be done immorally, of course, is that led to a drastic unemployment boom in black America. And even when industrialization and these factories that were in the Midwest a lot and in the West Coast a lot, Detroit and Chicago and all these places, when black people were often the last hired and the first fired. So black people dealt with the brunt of deindustrialization first as far as ethnic groups or social race groups, caste groups in this country. And it had a humongous negative impact and negative effect on these Midwestern cities, effects that we still see lingering today, effects that people losing their job led to an increase in alcoholism, an increase in the heroin epidemic was something that was surging at this time. It led to an increase in heroin usage. There's all types of things that you can, when you look at unemployment, that unemployment and high unemployment rates lead to perpetuating within communities. And so that deindustrialization was a side effect of the capitalism that exists in the country, a side effect of the marketplace mentality that exists in the country. And so when conservatives try to point to the market as a way to build black people up, or try to point to capitalism or entrepreneurial, things that are directly connected to financial gain as a way for black people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, the conversation must always return back to the fact that the market values have contributed to black people being in this position. Capitalism has contributed to black people being in this position. And so, yes, some of the market and capitalism and businesses, can some of these things be helped to absolve the masses of black people for the issues that they deal with? Yes, but it's not simply only those things, because we have seen how when you put too much focus on only those specific things, when something like deindustrialization happens, you deal with a disproportionate negative impact from those things. I think one of the other things that was pointed out is I want to harken back to is Cornel West speaks about affirmative action and how blacks who have been opted into the middle class of the society, middle class of America, how they began to turn against affirmative action because they felt that it was being used to disqualify or discredit them for the positions that they had gained and the positions that they have taken or they had earned. And the truth of the matter is that if it wasn't for affirmative action, if it wasn't for some of these businesses and corporations, whether it be private or public, being forced to look past their prejudices and biases, or being incentivized to look past their prejudices and biases when hiring people, and to hire black people, that there would have never been any possibility for black people to become part of this middle class, to even get to the place of being against affirmative action or being against people thinking they only have a job because they're black. Because if it wasn't for somebody working towards you being able to be black and get the job, you wouldn't be have the job to be upset about the affirmative action to begin with, and I'm probably not articulating that in the best way right now. Cornel West, did a good job of articulating it, but I just think that that's another thing to remember when you're having conversations with people about who may be against affirmative action or who may be against a black person being chosen first if two people are qualified simply because they're black. And I think that what has to be continued to be reminded excited about that is that for hundreds of years, not just decades, but for hundreds of years, simply being black disqualified you from having a position. And that disqualification led to an unequal existence for black people, an unequitable existence for black people. And the only way to get to an equitable existence and an equitable position is now, if there are two people lined up for a job and one of them is black and they are qualified and one of them is white and they are qualified, hiring the black person that is qualified, because if you look through the generations of that black person and that white person, you can almost guarantee that their father did not get the job because they were black, or their grandfather did not get the job because they were black, or their great-grandfather did not get the job because they were black. And those things have had direct impacts on the amount of generational wealth black people have been able to accumulate, on the upward mobility in the class that black people have been able to have. And so that is what we have to make sure that we are articulating. I think that too often we get into this place of speaking about equality, and we are too far behind the 8 ball to be trying to get to equality. We have to get to equity, and then once we can get to a proper equitable standing, then we can begin the process of continuing to keep things equal. But if we just start in 2021 and say, okay, everything's going to be equal, everybody's going to have a fair shake, everybody's going to have a fair chance, it's too late. The race has already started, and it's people who have been running the race not just simply years ahead or decades ahead, but hundreds of years ahead. And so if you do not hold back the people who are hundreds of years ahead and allow these other people to catch up into a place, we will never really be able to absolve ourselves of these issues and these problems. And so those are multiple things that stand out to me from that reading we just did. I think that it might be one more thing I want to point out. Okay, let's just keep on going. Let's keep reading. Try to finish this chapter up. The new black conservative claimed that transfer payments to the black needy engender a mentality of dependence which undercuts the value of self-reliance and of the solidity of the black poor family. The new black conservatives claim that transfer payments to the black needy engender a mentality of dependence which undercuts the value of self-reliance and of the solidity of the black poor family. They failed to see that the welfare state was an historic compromise between progressive forces seeking broader subsistence rights and conservative forces arguing for unregulated markets. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that the welfare state possesses many flaws. The reinforcing of, quote, dependent mentalities, end quote, and the unsettling of the family are two such flaws. But simply to point out these rather obvious shortcomings does not justify cutbacks in the welfare state. In the face of high black unemployment, these cutbacks will not promote self-reliance or strong black families, but will only produce even more black cultural disorientation and more devastated black households. This is so because without jobs or incentives to be productive citizens, the black poor become even more prone toward criminality, drugs, and alcoholism, the major immediate symptoms of the pervasive black communal and cultural chaos. On the practical and political level, the only feasible alternative to the welfare state is to create more jobs for poor people, something the private sector is simply uninterested in doing, for it is not in the economic interest to do so. Thus, the market rationality of the private sector relegates poor people to subsistence levels of living and/or unemployment. In the realities of contemporary American politics, to attack the welfare state without linking this attack to a credible jobs program, one that is more than likely supported by the public sector, is to reduce the already limited options of black poor people. To go as far as some new black conservatives have done and support the elimination of nearly every federal benefit program for the non-elderly poor, as put forward in Charles Murray's Losing Ground in 1984, is to serve as ideological accomplices to social policies that have genocidal effects on the black poor. The welfare state cannot win a war on poverty, yet it does sustain some boats that would otherwise sink given the high rate of unemployment. Yet even effective jobs programs do not fully address the cultural decay and moral disintegration of poor black communities. Like America itself, these communities are in need of cultural revitalization and moral regeneration. There is widespread agreements on this need by all forms of black leadership, but neither black liberals nor the new black conservatives adequately speak to this need. At present, the major institutional bulwarks against the pervasive meaninglessness and despair in Afro-America are intermediate institutions such as Christian churches, Muslim mosques, and character-building schools. They are all fighting an uphill battle. They cannot totally counter the powerful influence on black people, especially black youths, of the sexual and violent images purveyed by mass media. Yet those intermediate institutions that affirm the humanity of black people, accent their capacities and potentialities, and foster the character and excellence requisite for a productive citizenship are beacons of hope in the midst of cultural and moral crisis. My appeal to the positive role of such intermediate associations differs from that of the black conservatives. I view this role as both oppositional to and transformative of prevailing class subordination of American capitalist social relations, whereas they view this role as supportive of such class subordination. In this sense, private voluntary institutions constitute a central terrain of ideological and political contestation for myself and black conservatives with conflicting aims and goals. What then are we to make of the new black conservatives? First, I would suggest that the narrowness of their viewpoints reflects the narrowness of the liberal perspective with which they are obsessed. In fact, a lack of broad vision and subtle analysis and a refusal to acknowledge the crucial structural features of the black poor situation characterizes both black liberals and conservatives. The positions of both groups reflects a fight within the middle class elite. This parochialism is itself a function of the highly limited alternatives available in contemporary American politics. Second, the emergence of the new black conservatives signifies a healthy development to the degree that it calls attention to the failures of black liberalism and thereby encourages black politicians and activists to entertain more progressive solutions to the larger problems of social justice, of social injustice, and class inequality. Finally, more visible attacks of the new black conservatives on the black liberal leadership regarding U.S. foreign policy may force black intellectual exchange to focus on the relation of the plight of the third world, that of poor black, brown, red, yellow, and white people. Given the rapacious pro-Americanism in foreign affairs and American intellectual life, this focus would be salutary. Perhaps the widening of the split between black liberal elites and black conservative critics will lead to a more principled and passionate political discourse in and about black America. Such a discourse would promote more rational debates among conservative, liberal, and leftist voices concerning strategies to enhance the life chances of the black poor. The few valuable insights of the new black conservatives can be incorporated into a broader progressive perspective that utterly rejects their unwarranted conclusions and repugnant policies. I suspect that such a dialogue would unmask the new black conservatives as renegades from and critics of a moribund black liberalism who have seen some of the limits of this liberalism, but are themselves unable and unwilling to move beyond it. Hence, the new black conservatives settle for earlier historic versions of classical liberalism in a post-liberal society and postmodern culture. That brings us to the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5, Beyond Affirmative Action, Equality and Identity. And man, that was a lot. I think that the number one thing that I take away from the chapter that we just read, demystifying the new black conservatives or new black conservatism. I think new black conservatives. Oh, new black conservatism is the statement that Cornel West makes that he believes that the new black conservatives, neo-black conservatism that has began to arise or was beginning to arise at the end of the 20th century was directly from the failures of liberalism, of black liberalism and black neoliberalism. And That is something that I could not agree with more. To me, that is the main thing that stands out from this. And it's one of the main things that I've taken away from my experience with the political parties that exist here in Rockford and in Winnebago County as well, is that because of the fact that it is just these two parties, Democrats and Republicans, for the most part. Here we also have independents, but everywhere there are independents. There are other parties everywhere. But the main parties, the parties with the most dominant, is the Democrat and Republican. And typically Democrats are liberal, but there are also conservative Democrats. And typically Republicans are conservative, but the conversation would have to be that there are some liberal Republicans as well, or liberal-leaning Republicans. And that's one of the main things that I've seen here, is that the Democrats have failed black people in Rockford, Illinois. The liberals have failed black people in Rockford, Illinois, and they have no desire to fix those failures. They only have a desire to mask those failures in an effort to keep the black community in their back pocket as Democrats. And to also appeal to, the well-to-do white people who know of the black plight in this city, and who want to be aligned with people who are trying to work against that black plight. And so they're also trying to appease them by just making it seem as if they are aligned with the black masses or the black poor. But in reality, their policies are not aligned. In reality, they only go as far as they need to ensure the black vote. And they don't have to go that far because of the fact that in 2021, it is almost stigmatized to, especially in a city like Rockford, Illinois, stigmatized to be black and a Republican, or stigmatized to be black and a conservative. And so that makes it so that they do only have to go so far. I think that one of the things that we have to do as black people in Rockford, Illinois, is to not allow ourselves to be tied down to being a Democrat or being a Republican or a conservative or a liberal, and to take the things that the ideologies that exist in conservatism that can be beneficial to black people and apply those things, and the ideologies that can be beneficial in liberalism, and to take some of those things and apply it. And one of the main things that black neo-conservatives are speaking on is the importance of addressing the culture, the importance of addressing the mentality and the ideology that exists in the black communities outside of just political policies. And again, that is something that we do have to do the job of doing. That we can't just simply speak about institutional wrongs and institutional corruption and institutional evils without also speaking about the individual wrongs and individual evils. But what we must do is to as we are assessing individual accountability, continue to anchor that with the institutional accountability, with the understanding that holding individuals accountable will never have the residual effect of institutions then being held accountable. But holding institutions accountable can and will have the residual effect of individuals beginning to be held accountable. And just as much in the 21st century, in 2021, as we are dealing with individualistic, what up, brother? As we are dealing with individual issues in the black community, we are also dealing with institutional issues in the black community. I think one of the other things that stands out to me as well is the limits of any type of ideology that exists now, especially in the realm of politics. We have to understand that any ideology or any policy or politician or organization that is currently in existence right now, or that has been in existence the last however many years, is directly tied to the status quo. So what we are going to need is new institutions, new organizations, new ideologies, new thought patterns, new beliefs to get us to a new place. And so those are all some of the things that I take from this. And another one of the things that I take from this is the importance of creating a dialogue between a healthy, productive dialogue between black conservatives and black liberals, between black Republicans and black Democrats. Again, with the understanding that there is no one experience for black people, especially at how deep we are into the society now, especially with how token integrationism has pulled some black people from the margins of the society into the mainstream of the society. And so we have to be aware of all of those things as we are moving forward and creating avenues and opportunities for that type of a discourse to take place. And so we're at about 35 minutes. I'm going to get ready and wrap this Rockford Reading Daily episode up. Again, I want to encourage people to go back and listen to previous episodes of Rockford Reading Daily. The first book we began reading was Have Black Lives Ever Mattered by Mumia Abu-Jamal. And then we moved on to Race Matters by Cornel West. So if you haven't listened to any of those previous episodes, please listen to those. If you're listening to this at a point where there are more episodes out, please go listen to the episodes in the future. Be sure to stay tuned to the Social Construct of Leslie podcast, which we release on Thursdays and Sundays at the May 30th Alliance Podcast Network. And make sure to stay tuned to May 30th Alliance Podcast Network for other podcast series to be released. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, subscribe on YouTube, share this on whatever platform you're listening to it on. And again, we do these Rockford Reading Daily episodes to present everybody an opportunity daily to begin on their journey to struggle against police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice, and to present everybody an opportunity daily to further their journey to struggle against police terrorism, mass incarceration, and racial injustice. All right, we outside.